Let me just say that apparently the amplifier in the Senate chamber is blown. It should not stop us from proceedings today.
Do we have to haul into the mic?
No, you don't. No, you don't. But what I would want ZNS to do is kind of monitor how we're coming over and let us know so we can make sure that we are airing properly. Adoption of minutes.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the adoption of the minutes of Friday, the 8th day of June. If I may obtain a second.
It has been moved and, it's been moved and seconded that the minutes be adopted as written. All those in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes have been adopted as written. As we continue with the order of business, motions for leave of absence, leave to resign,
None.
swearing in of new senators,
None.
communications by the President, messages from the Governor General,
None.
messages from the House of Assembly,
None.
laying of documents by ministers,
None.
communications by ministers,
None.
communications by senators, questions,
None.
answers to questions,
None.
presentation of petitions, appointment of select committees,
None.
reports of committees,
None.
first reading of bills,
None.
second reading and committal of bills.
Madam President. Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading and committal. Thank you very much, sir. Of the interception of Communications Bill 2018. Madam President, it is truly unfortunate that in popular discourse on social media, where all discourse is popular, and even on the front pages, surprisingly enough, of mainstream newspapers, this interception bill has been maligned as being a, quote, spy bill. It is unfortunate, and I have had reason to criticize my friends in mainstream media for, in essence, following down the tabloid rabbit hole in the ways in which they have treated this bill. So when the bill was passed in the other place, big headline, spy bill passed. Is this a spy bill? No, it's not, as I will endeavor clearly to show. But before we get into the nitty and gritty on whether it is a spy bill or not, let's approach the matter in a mature, I think, or I'd like to say, and reasoned way. I am sure that all right-thinking persons would agree with me that the police should be equipped with all necessary tools to combat, to fight, and to suppress all violent crimes, murder, terrorism, arms trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, other forms of extreme violence and exploitation. If reasonable people cannot agree that the police should be so equipped, then I can only that the Bahamas today is a different country from the Bahamas that we all grew up in. I am satisfied that all truly reasonable people would agree with me that the police must be equipped to every reasonable degree. We live in a world where the communications revolution has brought severe challenges to the very boundaries of the nation state. political and national borders have become extremely porous. Ideas, just ideas now, cross cultural, political, and national boundaries at the speed of light. Communications platforms in real times link people separated by thousands of miles of ocean, desert, mountains, and plains. Link people in seconds, milliseconds, and link them using encrypted technologies, creating a single free communication space that is almost immune to penetration by law enforcement. End-to-end encryption technology. We know too that the internet itself, over which all of this new communications technology flows, end-to-end encryption, visual, verbal, you name it, all within this protected bubble of end-to-end encryption, meaning it's all coded so it can't be listened to by ordinary means. And then we know that the internet itself, which is the river through which all of this communication stream is flowing globally, round the world, every second, every millisecond. The internet itself has a dark side, which allows for every form of illicit communication, the buying and selling of the most unimaginable things by criminal elements. So the fact is that the globally integrated communications village, by its very nature, presents great opportunities for civil society, for people to friend over vast distances, to get to know one another, to exchange ideas. Yes, that's the positive side. But on the other hand, it presents very real challenges to law enforcement. Not only the law enforcement agencies of any particular country, particularly a small country like the Bahamas, but the law enforcement agencies of major countries and international efforts at cooperating between countries, big and small, in the fight against a global threat. The global threat not only of terrorism, but of transnational organized crime, where nuclear materials, fissile materials, radioactive materials, all of the building blocks of dirty bombs, or atomic bombs, or hydrogen bombs, can be smuggled and are smuggled. How is it that a little tiny country like a North Korea, within a decade and a half, is suddenly a world nuclear power? Precisely. And where did Pakistan get it? Exactly. This is the question. Where did a little country like Pakistan get that technology? Did someone steal it from India? And where did India get it? In other words, there's a market for these things. How does a little country like the Bahamas, for example, have any role? No, we don't want nuclear weapons. We want to play our role to protect, first of all, Bahamians from the consequences and potential adverse effects of these trades. And secondly, to do our part as a part of a broader international community. How does law enforcement respond? So, just as we in civil, and I would add the word civilized society, are brought closer together, both as a communal group here in the Bahamas, through social media, through the various organizations we all belong to, who communicate. Oh God, I'd be so tired sometimes, my phone blowing up with WhatsApp messages. from the various different civil, fraternal, social organizations that I'm a member of, and we all have our group. And then, your phone starts usually blowing up. You just see it like, message, and this one answering that one, and it's all day. So we are all brought closer together by communications technology, but so too are the criminal elements. Transnational criminals, they are brought closer together. And that proximity, that virtual proximity, creates an endless array of ability for them to plot, to plan, and to activate a host of evil designs using encrypted technologies hidden behind the screen of passwords and entry codes. Law enforcement agencies have no choice but to devise the means to combat the illicit activities, the illicit gains, the illicit profits, thus being exploited by criminals and terrorists using the latest modern communications technology, and the law enforcement must rise to the challenge. If the thief or the smuggler is using boats, land-based police got to learn how to ride boats. This is exactly what had to happen in the 80s. We had a Marine division, which just after independence was converted to the Defense Force. The Marine division of the police was converted to the Defense Force, leaving only an appendix, a truncated version to patrol the port of Nassau. But the rest of the Marine division became the building block on which the Defense Force was built. But the Defense Force don't have policing powers. So the drug smugglers were using the sea lanes. The police had to, in a sense, redevelop the capacity to operate on the sea lanes. Now, they're using WhatsApp. They're using a whole host of similar communications technologies like WhatsApp, but they have different names, a number of which you set the time, you send a message, and you set the time for it to be deleted forever from the system. Let me see, I got one. Someone suggested to me, I saved it once just out of interest. Not that I use it. I'm just trying to get Signal. Signal. It's called Signal. Right? You send that note to that special person and you don't want no one ever to see it again. You say, delete in 30 seconds. That note goes, it's just like the Snapchat, it's a WhatsApp version of Snapchat, which is where they say the kids share all sorts of nice pictures of each other. But then they go up for 30 seconds and then boom, they're just deleted forever. But of course, someone do a little screenshot, then your name all over the mud. That's why you have to warn these children about the use of these social media. But the point is, there are encryption-based communication technology, just like Snapchat, that will send your message and delete it automatically 30 seconds later. And all you need is 5 seconds for the fella on the other side to read it. That is the danger that we face today. And people think, oh, well, my WhatsApp, and whatever. And they think of it even as a form of permanence. And the whole point is about communication technology is, it is moving from the permanent to the impermanent. Think about the history of communications. They started off on clay tablets in Babylon. You still go and miss and scrape the wrong place and you'll find a clay tablet 5,000 years or more old, permanent. That's very permanent. To survive thunder, storm, fire, and flood. For 5,000 years in Babylon, buried under a heap of mud. And someone comes and digs it up, and 5,000 plus years later, it's still in perfectly readable form. But then you went from clay tablets to papyrus scrolls. By the time of the Roman Empire, scrolls had been replaced by books, and they still use clay tablets to train students. That was to write and learn how to write. The point is, though, from there you went all the way down to paper. And then you went to the printing press. But these are all permanent forms, more or less. As we come to the modern era, we move to telephone, telex. And now we're into these encrypted technologies on your phone. And this issue of long distance dialing is now a myth. There's no more long distance in communications. And criminals use it the same way. And as the technology evolves, it becomes less and less durable or permanent. Records can be made and destroyed in milliseconds. That is the point. And the police have to be able to rise, as had to happen in the 80s, Madam President, as had to happen in the 80s, when the police had to relearn their maritime skills to deal with an emergent challenge. So today, the police must be equipped, and this society, at its highest and with its best wishes, if you will, and highest intentions, has got to agree on a reasonable medium or compromise that will permit the police to rise to this challenge. Otherwise, the very freedoms that we seek to protect through the activism of, say, civil society, through this sort of social activism, through this sort of vigilance and an openness that is demanded, itself, that society, is in great peril, because there are persons out there for whom these very freedoms are inimical. These freedoms are their enemy. They seek to destroy these freedoms. They seek to destroy these societies. They seek to exploit and to profit from the exploitation of these technologies. And the police should be given the power to rise to that challenge. But yes, we have to acknowledge that while we, the state and the police, will tend to emphasize the negative side of this, civil society and all of us as citizens are rightly concerned that the police should not in any way abuse their powers, that there should be appropriate safeguards to prevent it, that the very wide powers of arrest, of detention and investigation that the police have traditionally enjoyed should not be abused. And if abused, there should be sufficient safeguards to nip that abuse in the bud, prevent it from happening again, learn from the mistake that led to that one abuse happening, put in protective methodologies to prevent it ever happening again, and so on, making a daily advance in civility and the protection of individual rights every day. So, there are two things. Our interest in having effective and impactful law enforcement for our own protection, the protection of our families, the protection of our social order, the protection of our national institutions. Our interest, on the other hand, in having our own personal and individual rights. What this means is, I'm not saying in the right of the police, I'm saying our interest as members of civil society in being protected by the police, in having institutions protected by the police, in having our nation protected from the assault of terrorists or criminals, and our interests also in our own personal liberty. We, as a society, must strike the balance. No, the police can't come and demand. Even the government can't come and demand. The government can only place before the behavior of people the option and say that there has to be a middle ground, and accept and believe that the vast majority of persons in our country are reasonable persons who do not wish to see their streets overwhelmed by criminals, who wish to be able to leave their homes without the thought that if they stop at a red light, someone's going to put a gun to their head, who wish to know that when their children are going to school, nothing harmful, and certainly not fatally harmful, will happen to them. There are certain things a reasonable society wishes and demands. And in that context, there must be a reasonable compromise to be struck between the right of law enforcement to enforce law, detect and prevent crime, using every lawful means and rising to the challenges of new technologies, and the right of the citizen to be protected, but also not only to be protected from crime and the effects of crime, but to have in that same process their civil rights and constitutional entitlements protected. So while we acknowledge and concede the right of law enforcement to keep us and our society safe, we and civil society demand that there be due respect and boundaries which preserve the very freedoms we espouse, while having the ability to detect, prevent, and apprehend those who would either abuse or exploit those freedoms for nefarious purposes. Now, while reasonable people and even the reasonable activists might privately agree to all I've said, including the leadership of most of the well-known civil society groups, still, they can never agree publicly. Because, just like politicians, we're governed by our base. Whatever you do, if you want to live from day to day, and if you want to survive the next big challenge, don't upset your base. I could use a different word, start with P, but you don't mess with your base. Okay? You don't, and so we're all constrained sometimes. Because the base of support of any organization is never inclined to compromise. My brother on the other side, you know how it is. When you go down there and them foot soldiers talk, say, slaughter those FNM Egyptians, slaughter them. Get rid of every last one of them. They no good. And our base say the same about y'all. Our base, sure. Only thing is, I've been on the receiving end of some of that abuse from one of y'all well-known, highly decorated base supporters who would be selling some fruit and vegetables. She chopped up a whole deputy prime minister in a time in the Elizabeth by-election. She wasn't taking no prisoners. She don't take none either. And that's how the base is. And so if you say you deny the BLB, I know different. And I know the FNM base. Okay, so everybody to a certain level, every leader or person in leadership in any social organization knows how far they can go with their base. So I don't expect anyone in civil society, to do anything more than to support their base. And so we must accept that in doing the right thing and in trying to strike the right balance between the legitimate concerns of law enforcement and society, the concerns of society to have effective law enforcement, and whose success guarantees the very freedoms that we so cherish, we must accept that we have to have a public consensus on the way forward. But when it comes to the base, you are never going to get their consent. Because the base is motivated by high and untarnished and unsullied idealism of the purest form. Which means slaughter the Egyptians. Let the Red Sea swallow them up. Because the only one who's right are the zealots. That's the reality. But society is not based on zealotism. It is based on compromise. Society itself is a social compromise between my freedom to do what I want and your freedom not to have me impose on you what I want if it makes you uncomfortable. And we all then agree to work towards common goals, mutual defense, etc. So I only want to make it clear today, because there has been some comment in social media by members opposite seeking to, I believe someone issued a public call that if Senator Handfield were to vote against this bill, he must resign the Senate forthwith. And I say that is That is, a political opportunism of the worst sort, because it was made clear from day one in this place. I remember, members opposite snared, said, how could he be here? Oh, he marched and did all this. And I made it clear that he was here precisely for that. And he's not here to carry the water bucket for the FNM. Neither is Senator Dotson Isaacs within their sphere of public interest. She is here to represent the interests of the labor union. And if this government were to come with a bill amending or changing the labor laws in ways that the labor union found to be unacceptable, I would fully accept and glorify in Senator Dotson Isaacs vote no. Because she's here to represent and speak for labor. That's her first job. Now, on anything else other than that, that's a different matter. The same thing applies with Senator Enfield. I made that very clear to his members here. He is indeed. Okay, and what that means is this, that as the Senate whip, first of all, the office of whip in the Senate is a constitutional it doesn't exist. There is no whip in this place. Yes, and I'm telling you what he does as the whip. He assists me in ensuring, marshaling the order of speakers and reminding them, because they get tired of hearing from me, about their duty to be here whenever the Senate is called. Don't talk to me. No, the whip does other things. I know I was chief whip in the other place. I can tell you. He's a snitch. He listens, he hangs out with the backbench. He hears what they have to say. He goes to the leader. That's his job. His job is to be the contact point between the backbench and the political leadership. Read Erskine Mays. It tells you plainly the job of the whip. Okay? It tells you plainly the job of the whip, properly done. He is not simply a choreographer, but there is no function for whip in this place. It is a honorific. It is an honorific. Which puts him one notch, a tiny notch, above the rank and file senator. You see, and his job is to command their attention. Look, the point though is this. I'm going to say this specifically. That because on all other matters that are not offensive to the reason he was appointed and the group he was appointed to represent in this place, it is expected that he will do the ordinary. But whenever any matter touches or infringes upon those persons he was appointed pursuant to the intention of the founders of the Constitution, when they created this species of senator, we call them consultation senator, you call them independent senator in your day. No. Well, you know who decides. No, it's clear. It is clear. Right now we're speaking on a matter that directly involves civil society and civil society points of views. And so his vote is his vote on this matter. But on that note, let me just indicate to I'm not talking to anyone anywhere else. Make it clear. The rules prevent any reflections on proceedings any other place. Absolutely, whatever. But let me just remind my colleague senators, and all who will hear me remind them, they could be reminded too. But that's not my concern. If this was a budget bill, then conscience or not, group or not, every government senator would be expected to vote for it. And for every bill making up the package of budget legislation, any vote on a budget or any part of a budget is inherently a vote of confidence in the government. Governments have fallen because they could not get budgets through. It ain't like America, where they go 5 years, like with Obama, without a budget. And everybody just passed a continuing resolution when the spirit get them, or let the whole thing shut down for 6 weeks and then do it again when they get embarrassed. Not the British parliamentary system that we have inherited. The Canadian government, under Joe Clark, 28 days in office, fell because he couldn't get a budget through. It fell formally. It took another 5 months for him to actually get out of office, but he basically lost the mantle of prime minister 28 days after he won an election because he couldn't get a budget through. So every budget vote is a vote of confidence. So any member of this place, who on conscience wishes to vote against the budget, well, they may as well just turn in the letter of resignation at the same time from any appointed post. Any post you appointed to. I can't do anything with fellas who got elected to something. I could talk in here though. I could talk in here and say, turn in your resignation at the same time. Okay? Now, if your conscience or your base is giving you a problem on the budget, you may always speak freely, but the whip is on. And if you cannot support every measure in the budget by voting for it, you may as well tender your resignation at the same time that you vote with the opposition. Now, is this a spy bill? Civil society and the press, and now the PLP, hypocritically, in my view, let me just make it clear, in my view, hypocritically, and I'll show you why it's hypocritical, have dubbed this bill as a spy bill. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh, yes. Okay. And that is in part because, okay, fine. You all deny you call it a spy bill. Fine. You oppose it nonetheless. You oppose it nonetheless in certain respects, in the other place, on grounds which, in my view, are not consistent either with the PLP's, Madam President, record in matters of this nature, about which I will speak, or the PLP's bill as tabled. Okay. Civil society and the press have dubbed it a spy bill. In part, that is because they also call the PLP's bill a spy bill. And we, when in opposition, joined in that chorus. We called it a spy bill too. That is the PLP's bill. Is this bill a spy bill? No. Why do I say it's not a spy bill? Because it is materially different from the PLP's bill. Materially different. Mashran, sorry, I have a copy of this bill, please. Give me a second. Thanks. Okay, never mind, I have one here. Thanks. Oh yeah, I'll explain to you how it's different. Firstly, the PLP's bill would have allowed the police to obtain an interception warrant from a judge for an offense. Now, what does the word an offense mean? It really means any offense. This meant that the PLP would have allowed the police to intercept private communications for any suspected offense, even magistrates' courts offenses. Even a traffic violation is an offense. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Okay. All right? This meant that if unionists were meeting and the police got wind of it, to plot a wildcat strike, which is an offense against the labor law, because before you can strike, you must pass a vote. That vote must be registered. Then you have to have a cooling off period, and only then can you strike. So what they decided, listen, man, we tired of this foolishness. Everybody call in sick. Oh, I believe that recently happened somewhere. So if someone is sitting down in a room and the police get wind of it, we are discussing your bill. We're discussing your bill, and don't get all touches, my good brother. That bill is not before us, but its name is before us, and I'm shooting down the application of the name we put and civil society put on your bill, how it is done on our bill, okay? It is improperly applied. The word spy bill is improperly applied to the FNM's bill. And y'all could moan and groan and carry on all you want. The fact is, the true spy bill was tabled by the Progressive Liberal Party.
Madam, if you just yield for a second.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell on a
I don't know.
on a
what?
point of what?
Point of
Well, no, he's
reference?
making an accusation against the PLP.
Did you
about
table
what
the
the-
spy bill?
Excuse me. Excuse me.
You know.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell. I'd just like to ascertain on what point.
Yes, right. He's making an allegation about the Progressive Liberal Party and a spy bill. And I'm saying the Progressive Liberal Party made no accusation against the Free National Movement about a spy bill.
I
That
agree with
name came from the member and his colleagues when they were in opposition to us about a previous bill that was tabled. That's the only point I make. And so it is misleading to continue down that line. And that bill is not before us.
Thank you very much. I did withdraw the suggestion that it was the PLP that has labeled it a spy bill, but I stand by I stood by and stand by the fact and the statement that civil society, elements of civil society, and the press continue to mislabel the FNM's bill as a spy bill. I also acknowledge that we call the PLP's bill a spy bill. Now, but in the defense of the Free National Movement's bill, it is necessary to draw the distinction and show the differences between the later and present bill now before this Parliament, which is the bill we are defending and we are seeking to pass, the FNM's interception bill, and to show how it differs greatly from the PLP's interception bill. And if that is unfortunately, sir, I am dealing with a narrative out there, and that is my right to do so. I don't tell you how to debate. You do your debate in your way. I don't sit and lecture you or tell you or instruct you. That's the PLP way. No, I'm saying that you all had a spy bill. It was truly a spy bill. Oh, yes. It gave the police carte blanche, absolute freedom to spy on people based on the allegation of any crime, no matter how trivial the matter might have been. The fact that even infractions of the law which could only possibly have been dealt with by a magistrate, therefore by their nature being minor and sometimes trivial offenses, they could have been the subject of an application for an interception warrant because under the PLP bill, any offense is all that is needed. Any. It says an offense. Well, if you say an offense and don't say which, it logically means any offense.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell.
I'm sorry, I'm still rising on the misleading point. When I look at the two bills, the operative issue that was supposed to have been addressed by this particular bill was what the Privy Council said in the case of Maycock, which is it did not stand up to the current standards of interception law. That was the only point. The bills, both bills, this present one which is before the House and the past bill, has in place the same regime. The same regime. So going on about this point as if this, so on and so forth, the question is whether the independent review is in place. That's the issue. So you're polluting the issue and misleading the country by going down this road.
It would seem to me that both of you ought to really not confuse the public on this bill, and we really should be debating the
Just deal
bill
with the
on the
bill,
table.
what it says.
I am not confusing the public. I am addressing a very real public issue that has been bandied about from pillar to post on social media and in mainstream media. And it is my inalienable right to do so. And I will not be intimidated, nor will I be sidetracked by members opposite.
Senators.
And I expect that you will sit down and meekly take your licks.
Excuse me.
Sit down
Senators,
and
I will
meekly
not
take
have
your
you
licks.
take this chamber down this road. So please,
You can't dictate to me
can
how
I
do my
please
speech.
have order in this chamber?
Madam President.
Chair, continue.
President.
Continue.
As I have said, there is an intellectual fiction or lie that has been bandied about and spread over social media and taken up by mainstream media, and I intend to address it. Okay, and you cannot, Madam President, the member opposite cannot dictate to me how I address a lie. I'm being honest. The PLP bill applied to any offense. I don't care. We all know.
Senators,
that the case of
senators,
Melvin-
there's only one person on the floor at a time.
Thank you.
Now, I have allowed you all to be able to stand on a point of clarification. Now, I can go back to what my normal procedure is that is to wait until each debater has debated, and then you can make your comments.
Thank
Because
you.
we do have to have order in the chamber.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as I stated, the former PLP bill allowed for the application for an interception warrant to be made to a judge of the Supreme Court in respect of an offense, meaning by necessary implication, any offense, because it did not limit what the word an offense related to. It therefore permitted the police to make an application through the process set out in the bill, even in respect of simple magistrates' courts matters that would involve perhaps some issues such as wildcat strikes or illegal demonstrations, because you know still as a matter of law you need to get the permission of the Commissioner of Police to demonstrate. So what if the action group would have been reformed and decided they were going to go down there and demonstrate on Bay Street, or a Dion Folks, or for example, when he and Derek Sims and other activists would have one-man demonstrations in the 80s and get arrested. So what if they're sitting down in Brightley's restaurant, as we used to do in the 80s? And so the police say we have reasonable cause to believe that the Free National Movement and a group of the Free National Movement called the Action Group is meeting in a place called Brightley's and plotting acts of civil disobedience. Under the PLP's bill, even though these are magistrates' matters, demonstrate without a permit, loitering or whatever, they could have gotten the listening devices and go and bug Brightley's restaurant. How much people's civil rights would be involved in that? That is the reality of what the PLP's bill allowed for. That is my interpretation. You may
I'm
differ
sorry.
from it.
No,
I'm-
Two members cannot be on the floor at the same time.
This is
I'm-
crazy.
Two members
This is
cannot
crazy.
be on the
This
floor at the
Senate
same
does not
time.
address hurt feelings
No,
or
no, sir.
different
No,
legal
sir.
opinions.
Excuse me, excuse
On a
me.
point of order.
Can I have both of you sit, please? I've asked both of you to let's debate the bill at hand. And I don't need this constant argument between both of you on any issue. Now, what will happen is I would ask Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel to continue his debate,
Thank you.
and Senator Fred Mitchell, at the end of his debate, which has nothing to do with your presentation, you will have an opportunity to respond. But I will have order in this chamber.
Madam.
Now, what is the difference? What is the difference between our bill that is here today and that bill? This bill specifically limits the ability to apply for an interception warrant or any other form of warrant to specified offenses, not any offense. And specified offenses are set forth in the schedule to the bill. And it's very clear, very clear. The specified offenses are offenses against the Anti-Terrorism Act, the Dangerous Drugs Act, the Firearms Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, Sexual Offenses Act, Prevention of Bribery Act, Computer Misuse Act, Data Protection, Privacy of Personal Information Act, that's for cybercrime offenses, the Protection of Aviation, that's for hijacking, Trafficking in Persons, Prevention of Sex Trafficking Act, the Penal Code, Chapter 84, murder and trafficking in persons. Higher order offenses. indictable offenses. Indictable offenses. Okay? Kidnapping, manslaughter, extortion, gang membership, participation in organized criminal groups, use of armed force against the government or members of parliament, and any act of misdemeanors in
throwing
public
water?
law or corruption. And so, Madam President, there's a distinct difference. You know, in one of my earlier comments, I explained to the press, I said, look,
Oh, sorry.
the FNM bill is different from that of the PLPs because what we've done is we've carved out what I call a bubble or zone of privacy. Only the most serious offenses that are indictable are going to be offenses in respect of which an interception warrant can be applied for. Not any offense. And beneath that cone of the most serious offenses, beneath that arch, if you will, of very serious offenses, is a zone of privacy.
Like Maxwell Smart, put down the zone of silence, the cone of silence.
I don't know who Maxwell Smart is, or whether he's Maxwell Smart or Maxwell Dumb. All I know is that's what I said.
No,
Okay.
Maxwell Smart was
So,
an agent on TV.
specified, oh, you mean Get Smart?
Yes.
Oh, well, okay, that's
You
fine.
don't know who Maxwell Smart
No, I don't know. I didn't know the name Maxwell. I know the series Get Smart, but that was way back. Specified offenses are the only offenses that will be the subject of an application for interception warrant. Now, speaking about the history of this matter, yes, both bills, and certainly the PLP's bill, was an attempt to answer the Privy Council's, I suppose it would be recommendation. It was really a question they asked rhetorically. They said, yes, we uphold the Listening Devices Act as a pre-existing law, but is this really the kind of legislation that is required in a 21st century society where the world standards have shifted, where this is not said, but it's implied in what they said, where the standard now is of oversight. And so the first bill was an attempt to answer that question. The difficulty was they had no defense to the charge that it was too broad in its application because it applied to anything, any offense. That is the only logical reason. Because yes, it provided for the application to the Attorney General, and we had to correct one error where it didn't specifically state, as the Privy Council sort of indicated, that the Attorney General should have a right to say no, which in fact has always been the case in practice. But the initial draft of the bill by the PLP did not have that embedded in it, that comment that the Attorney General has an inherent right to say no once an application is made. If they can't even satisfy the Attorney General that there is a basis to go to a judge for a interception warrant, they won't even get to first base. But we've added that in to make that clear. And you then had what the PLP bill had, and which ours continues, this issue of the going to a judge, seeking from a judge the actual order, whereas under the Listening Devices Act, it was only the Attorney General or the Minister of National Security, members of the executive. And additionally, as the Privy Council indicated, the need for oversight also involved reporting. And so both bills called for a system of reporting back to the judge, so that if, for example, the police had gone on a wild goose chase, they'd brought evidence to the judge sufficient for a warrant to be issued, but after 30 days of intercepting communications, nothing is there. You report that to the judge said, don't come back, unless you've got something better than this. You see, and that's the protection and safeguard for the individual. Fine. Both bills have that. And so, okay, let me be fair, right? I think the criticism could have been made of the PLP's bill could have been more specific by all persons as to what the real concern with was, because there can be no criticism of the basic premise of both bills, that any interference with the rights of the subject should be under independent oversight. The best guarantee we have of that, with all their foibles and weaknesses and strengths, is an independent judiciary. So what could have been the criticism? The criticism was articulated at the time as being it was too broad. The powers that were being sought were too broad. And that, I interpreted and I looked at it, as I looked at what you did to try and see how we could do it differently. I looked at it and I said, no, we cannot have a scenario where the state can go for anything. And that is why we carved out what the press, the press and they're good when they have their good cap on, when they want to be fair about it, what they now call the usual serious offenses. Because they now know that we have defined, not only in this bill, but in the Proceeds of Crime Act, in the Financial Transactions Reporting Act, a series of, if you want to call them, predicate offenses that will invoke the most firm and strong response from the state. Using every tool we have: terrorism, money laundering, human trafficking, drug trafficking, these offenses, murder. These are the specified offenses, and the press is calling now, the usual offenses. In fact, in one of their commentaries about this bill, they referred to our specified offenses as the usual offenses, because the message is getting out that there are categories of offenses that this government, in right of the state, is setting out as being the offenses that will attract the most aggressive response from every agency of the state. And so we would trust and believe that should we demit office at the will of the people at any future time, that any successor will follow that template, and that there are clear differences between all other offenses and these specially designated specified offenses. So, Madam President, one other area that we've made a significant change over the PLPs, and I know I can cause some people to jump on their hind legs on this one, but I'm sorry if I do. I don't mean to cause anybody who was not directly involved in what is addressed here to be upset. I know, I got that from Rumpole and the Bailey. He always says he jumps on his hind legs. Okay, no, jump on their feet then. Rumpole and the Bailey, man, he always speaks about himself jumping up on his hind legs to address the court. There is under Section 20 an offense of unauthorized disclosure of interception. The PLP's original draft only had section, the first part, which was anyone who had access to the information, if they were to make unauthorized use of it, that was a criminal offense. In subsection 2, though, we've added a subsection 2B, which is plainly, I'm going to say now, I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to say what it is intended to address. Anyone who receives any unauthorized disclosure from a person under subparagraph A, subparagraph A really is the policeman, or the person who did the listening or did the interception, who got the information, someone in that sort of status who misuses the information. B adds in anyone who receives any unauthorized disclosure from a person in A, from the policeman or the agent acting for the policeman who's doing the interception, receives any unauthorized disclosure and makes any subsequent disclosure to any other person, is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $25,000. I'm going to be very blunt and I'll say this. Okay? That subsection, that's section 20, subsection 2B, was crafted with those persons who would stand up in Parliament and read people's emails, stolen emails. Now, we will see how the ancient prerogative of parliamentary privilege stands up against a law that specifically criminalizes it. Because in the UK, I can tell you that parliamentary privilege does not apply to the commission of a criminal offence on the floor of Parliament. Now, it is my belief that the Misuse of Computer Information Act already made that a criminal offence to read stolen emails. But that's another issue.
Hang on a second. Wait a second. Wait a second.
Now,
On a point of order.
yes, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred
Someone
Mitchell.
connected with stolen emails?
Yeah, stolen
No,
emails.
no, sir. No, sir. No way. No, sir.
Oh, you said it went stolen?
No, sir.
Senator Mitchell,
No, sir.
could you please just state your point of
No,
order?
sir. And the point, the implication is there's an allegation being made that someone from our side stole emails, because
No,
the
no,
case,
no.
it has to be.
No.
You're talking about a case,
No.
an instant case, which about the House of Assembly. The only case where that has arisen has in connection with PLPs. And not even the judge made that assertion.
I didn't,
Never.
I didn't say that
Never,
anybody who
never,
read...
never.
Let me
I
ask
never
both
said-
of you. Let
Never.
me ask both
Never.
of you to move from
And
that
it's the worst
point.
judgment in the world. I don't know where you get this judge from.
Excuse me.
know?
Sorry,
Now we
I won't go into that.
excuse me.
Madam President, please.
No, you.
Yeah.
Can you
I
please?
never said what he said.
Yes, but I am saying.
But the implication
I am
is
saying.
There's no implication.
It is.
Gentlemen, senators, I am asking you to move away from that line of thought anyway. Okay?
Okay.
Just move away
Okay.
from it.
I move away from that line of thought, Madam President. But suffice it to say, I just want to say, I never said that anyone who did anything in that other place stole anything. I didn't say that anyone who did anything in that other place stole anything. Okay,
I asked
Fine.
you to move away and not repeat that.
okay.
Please.
Anyway, the law as presently drafted that will be passed is that if you get something from someone who stole something and you use it, misuse it, then you yourself will be committing a crime. Period. Okay? Now, I want to say this. And you may get mad now again too, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry. When this bill is passed, the line of defense for the citizen is going to be the judiciary. And that is the way it should be. We all can agree on that. And I can say that no more, because I believe the judicial test to be a standard above that, no more will the police be able to go to a magistrate and get some warrant and go to the home of the then national chairman or anyone like him, Darren Cash, and say they have a search warrant that allowed them to confiscate his computer, home computer, iPad, him and his wife's cell phone, and for them to take them and subject those tools and equipments to some kind of search. Okay? A judge will stop it. That is what I'm saying. A judge will stop it. That is the. Well, we don't have no form. Fred Smith is not the police.
Also, Fred Smith is not on the debate.
Precisely.
So I don't know,
Precisely.
you know, we really need to be guided by what we say when we bring public individuals in the public in this place.
Precisely.
And the remarks being made. So please, senators, again, you know, I must say, if this is going to be a precursor to our budget debate next week, I'm going to put you all on notice now that I will not tolerate a disruption in this chamber. Well, I always have been. So, anyway, let us continue, please.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, I will be guided. I will stay on the totally high ground and whatever. But seriously, Madam President, the point is, it is my belief that the judiciary will provide the necessary level of protection that civil society demands and we all need. My only concern, is we added, and you know, sometimes you have a bit of policy thrown in, right? In every bill. We added Part 6 dealing with the listening devices because we were really trying to preserve the flexibility of the police for their run-of-the-mill listening to phone conversations of gangsters. But because of members' opposite's opposition to that, the bill has been changed and now it all requires to go to the judge. I just hope that in terms of the day-to-day stuff, like, you know, just to hear, look, our man on the move, which is just that 30 seconds is enough to give the police a warning to hit all the points, all the nodes, to see what man on the move to do or an assassinate who. I hope that now up to having to go to a judge and do affidavits or whatever. You can go on an urgent basis under Section 10, but you still have to come back with affidavits and everything else. That lack of flexibility won't hurt the enforcement arm of the police, but you know, we can only do what we can do. And at the end of the day, the opposition made a strong case that they didn't want that degree of flexibility. They didn't want it to go to a magistrate. I suppose having regard to the dire circumstances that were afflicted on then Chairman Darren Cash and his family by virtue of magistrate's warrant, there's sound grounds for the PLP in opposition to object to magistrates issuing such warrants, although they had no such compunction. But anyway, I'll leave that alone. I'm still on high ground. Okay. That had nothing to do with interception of communications. We're dealing with interception of communications. Once again, let me just say one thing to you. We all accept that the police have certain remit within their authorities in terms of how they investigate. We may not always be comfortable or like the way in which the police choose to investigate or what they choose to do in the course of that investigation. But please don't say y'all, because there is certainly none of y'all had no, I'm dealing with a document submitted by the PLP to the Parliament.
Senator Bethel, could we just continue?
I finish now.
Okay, good.
Madam President, I'm sorry if I made my fellow senators on the other side a little uncomfortable, but I think it was necessary. It was necessary to dispel the nonsense that is being spoken of about this bill. On that note, Madam President, I do move that this bill be read a second time and committed. Thank you.
Is there a second? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Dr. Mildred Hall Watson.
Good morning, Madam President, fellow senators, Bahamians all. I stand to second the table bill as presented by our government leader, Attorney General Carl Bethel. This bill, of course, is the Interception of Communication Bill 2017.
Let me just remind senators that as a result of the amplifier being out, you will have to speak a little louder for all of your other colleagues to hear at the table.
Madam President, I would first, though, like to acknowledge God in His goodness and for His grace, which He gives us so freely, allowing us all to be here today. Before I present my brief remarks, I would like to acknowledge the sorrow our country experienced 2 weeks ago today, when we lost 4 Bahamian females as they demonstrated their rights to advocate for the Bahamian worker. We ask for God's spirit and our prayers to continue to lift and support their families and all of the recovering individuals who were injured. On another note, I would also like to congratulate Mrs. Elena Mortimer Briard, who graces the cover of the current Bahamian Investor for the second half of this year. Yes, she is. Both of her children being delivered by myself, so I know the lady well. And also like to add that for the first half of the year, there was also a female who graced the cover of the Bahamas Investor, Mrs. Michelle Thompson. And so I would like to congratulate both of them for the levels they have achieved in the area of finance. Now, as I return to this bill and give my brief remarks, Madam President, this bill sets out the legal guidelines and parameters by which agents can, when appropriately authorized and designated, execute an interception and entry warrant. Once authorized, the agent in his or her execution must be absolutely confidential regarding the contents of any intercepted or faced or charged with against anyone who has been charged with an offense, particularly if this information is disclosed. In addition to strict guidelines being present for its issuance, there are specific guidelines for termination of the same. Madam President, the importance of this is the presence of checks and balances. If reasons arise that make it necessary to terminate the interception order, and there will be legal guidelines under which that decision can be made. This is backed up by the fact that no information obtained can be used in any case against any individual whose property or self has been intercepted if brought to court, be it a criminal or civil matter. It's extremely important to emphasize this point. So frivolous decisions should not be made when someone wants to obtain and then enforce an interception order, because it serves to deter any authorized agent who, for political, personal, fiscal, or reasons otherwise, may give consideration to attempting to get a warrant under nefarious pretenses and disclosed information. They themselves then is open to becoming charged with an offense. Madam President, in today's world, we know it is different from that of many years ago. What one needed for national security purposes years ago would serve very little or no purpose in today's world. Methodologies of security are vastly different than they were in 1969 when we had the last bill for this purposes go through Parliament. Much has happened in the international arena that has had and can affect our country that we live in as we interact with the world. It is important that our internal and external security measures are comparable to what is present in the rest of the world. Our borders are extremely porous, and it is very challenging for the government of the day to always be able to determine on each one of our islands, rock or key, where instruments for security breaches against our country may be present. Madam President, in addition, if by chance our government is able to detect a breach, we have no current laws to govern the methods of interception that should exist today. The risks of individuals, local and foreign, using powers to spy on citizens, private or public, possibly exist. However, encased in this bill are measures which will assure all individuals who have access to warrants of interception are honorable men and women who understand that they, if doing this without the legal parameters, may themselves be a victim. The bill states a person who intentionally intercepts a communication in the course of its transmission by means of a public postal service or communications network commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $50,000 or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 4 years or both. And I think it's important that this caveat is in the bill, which will deter many individuals who may, on a whim, attempt to make a decision to execute a warrant of interception without doing it properly, because they themselves then may end up being the criminal. Madam President, therefore, to allow our current law enforcement officers to be empowered and perform the jobs they have been assigned to do, we must change the current law so that there are legal strongholds to protect them in their work. We as a country need to invest in new technologies to assist in combating crime, because we can be assured the criminals will have access also to all new technologies. Madam President, in his remarks on this bill back in April, the Minister of National Security was able to describe several significant plots that were intercepted from one side of the world to the other side of the world, namely the United States. And we have no idea as to where this information may have been routed. It could have been our country. We don't know. We need to be on board with ensuring that we have the capabilities of intercepting plots which may be being established from one side of the world to the other, which can be catastrophic for all of us. We are aware of the cybercrimes that occur in the world today. Criminal activity in the financial world are commonplace in and out of the country. Madam President, we know that our banks are pushing us daily to do all of our banking transactions online or through the ATM, which we know can easily be intercepted and hacked. If this becomes a major issue in the country, it would be penny wise and pound foolish to attempt to wait until it becomes a commonplace activity before we put the appropriate legislation in place. And so in a few comments, Madam President, let us therefore be proactive and act now and not post a major event. Therefore, for these reasons and more, I am pleased to second and support this progressive legislation.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for the interception of communications and the provision of information for interception in the Bahamas and for related matters. As many.
No, it doesn't.
Sorry, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable
Thank you so much.
Dr. Darbo.
I didn't want to start without your consent, Madam President, but thank you for recognizing me. And it is indeed an honor and a privilege to rise once again in this honorable chamber to make my contribution to the interception of communication bill, which was labeled the spy bill by this administration while in opposition. Madam President, the Progressive Liberal Party presented our version of this bill prior to 2017 general election. I supported that version of the bill then, and I support this bill in principle, which is similar to the one we presented in many aspects, with some relevant amendments. Madam President, under the leadership of the then Minister of National Security, the late Dr. Bernard Nordage, we saw the necessity of this bill and tabled it as we clearly understood the importance it has in national security. The leader on our side clearly indicated the case as it relates to the Privy Council and the reason why this bill was birthed. Nevertheless, Madam President, the then opposition, now government, led an all-out attack in the media and the other place with the Interception and Communication Bill laid in Parliament. In fact, Madam President, members on the side opposite, one who sit in this chamber today, use fear-mongering tactics to incite confusion about this bill among the Bahamian people. As a result, the slogan, "Kill the bill," was coined, and the bill was shelved by our administration for further consultation. Nevertheless, Madam President, with the exception of the amendments outlined by the Attorney General, once again, we see the same bill that this current administration opposed so dearly while in opposition for the sake of politics, being brought to the House of Assembly to debate and approve, and now before us in this honorable chamber. Madam President, less than 1 year in office, they are now singing a different tune as today the leader of the government business on the side opposite stood to his feet and presented pretty much the same piece of legislation the Free National Movement so drastically opposed a year ago. Madam President, while preparing for this debate last night, I began to reflect on the life of my former colleague, the late Dr. Bernard Nordage, who was the leader of government business in the other place at the time when this bill was laid in Parliament. He was a good man who served his country well on the political front line and fought for justice for the common man. The record would reflect that many improvements made to the now Ministry of National Security, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Defense Force, and the prison officers during his tenure is there for everyone to see. May God rest his soul. Madam President, I also recall the moment that in his capacity as leader of government business in the other place, he laid our version of this bill, drafted by the AG's office under the guidance of the then Attorney General, Alison Maynard Gipton, the technical officers in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and National Security. Madam President, I could distinctly remember the opposition's aggressive attack on our administration for bringing this piece of legislation to Parliament. And they were all about talking about how the PLP was introducing a bill for one reason only, and that was to listen to all F&M's conversation leading up to the general election. What a bunch of hogwash. Consequently, Madam President, the Prime Minister made it clear to the Bahamian people that the Free National Movement will vote against the bill at that time. And it was said that it violated the constitutional rights of Bahamians throughout the length and breadth of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Hogwash, all politics. But Madam President, no lie lasts forever. No lie lasts forever. Except for the amendments outlined by the leader on the side opposite, this bill is pretty much identical to the one introduced by our administration. Madam President, less than 1 year, the Bahamian people have come to realize that the Prime Minister and the Free National Movement cannot be trusted in policy issues. They continue to flip-flop in their political positions and campaign promises outlined in their manifesto. Madam President, in opposition, the members on the side opposite say one thing, and in government, they do the reverse. This has been the F&M's operation agenda since coming to office a year ago. In fact, the current 60% increase in value-added tax that's sparing a lot of controversy is just another reckless example of how a change of position this administration can have and lack the ability for transparency and accountability to the Bahamian people. Madam President, our vision of the Interception of Communication Bill met both our international and local obligations. It targeted both local and foreign offenders involved in the trafficking of firearms, drugs, money laundering, sabotage, espionage, and genocide. Madam President, like the bill presented by our administration, this bill will authorize the inception of communication of public and private systems within a single legal framework. The former administration was fully aware of the importance of this piece of legislation, but said to kill the bill. As a tool, it will assist the law enforcement agency, as well as possible drawbacks for its implication. For this reason, in presenting our version of the bill, we ensured that the language used by the drafters set proper parameters in order to prevent the potential violation of our constitutional rights and abuse. Madam President, like the bill we presented, the current piece of legislation makes it clear that all communication interceptions must be authorized by a judge upon application to the AG and the request for an authorized officer. This clause prevents potential abuse and violation of intent. Madam President, in the other place, the Honorable Glenys Hanna Martin made an objection to an amendment that allowed the Director of National Intelligence Agency to make an application for the interception warrant based on the fact that the NAI has not been established in law. Madam President, we on this side agree with this. We on this side agree that this amendment, the government has put the cart before the horse and opens the bill when enacted to legal challenge in the courts. Madam President, we all agree that this bill gives the Ministry of National Security and the law enforcement agency a greater tool to fight against organized crime. We agree. With this 21st century digital platform to fight crime, the law enforcement agencies can now be one step ahead of the criminal enterprises who for years have taken advantage of the government's inability to act swiftly because of inadequate laws and the lack of modern technological tools. Finally, Madam President, we on this side will always remember the late Dr. Bernard Nordage for his visionary leadership as the former Minister of National Security and in the last Christie administration. I commend his determination to modernize the law enforcement agency using digital platforms. Madam President, I said before that I wouldn't be long because the leader on the side opposite has definitely laid a case that the bill that we presented is pretty much similar to the bill that we're debating today, with the exception of a few amendments. They opposed it then, but we will take the higher road because we understand the importance of this bill and we will support it because it is necessary. As I conclude, I support this bill in principle, although I am certain that sooner than later this piece of legislation will be back in both chambers for additional amendments, many which were suggested by our colleagues in the lower house. However, Madam President, this bill will be as good as the financial and manpower resources put behind it. You see, talk is cheap when you bring bills to this place. If you don't have the resources, and the resources are clearly not outlined in this budget, and we will speak about it when we speak on the budget, because it's talking about putting this in place. Where's the funding in the budget lines for the support of this bill? Therefore, I recommend that the government put the necessary resources behind the full implementation, ensuring that all agencies involved understand the operational mechanism. They're taught on how to utilize these pieces of legislation, and all parties involved in its execution clearly understand their limitations in order to avoid potential violations on human rights. Madam President, what a difference a day makes. A year ago, they had placards all over downtown Nassau to kill the bill. Now, they have this issue here before us today. Oh, you want to talk about that then? You want to talk about that? The 12% you're putting down the throats of the people in Grand Bahama in a dead economy? Madam President,
Senators,
what a
again,
difference a day make.
you know,
What a difference a day make. A year ago, these same individuals all over downtown placard to kill the bill did a terrible job in opposition to understand the contents of the bill, and now they are forced to govern. They have to bring these same bills back to these honorable places, which we laid on the table. Madam President, we support this bill. We support the intent of this bill. We understand it will produce the digital platform necessary. It will give our legal and as well as our law enforcement agencies the tool necessary to go behind criminals who have developed sophisticated enterprises that we cannot tap into now because we do not have the laws to support. Thank you so much.
thank you, Honorable Senator. As many? Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable J. Dorset.
You didn't like yesterday. You hot. You can say it next week. You can say it next week when we come by your office to do it by your office next week. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, we want you to come down now. Don't close the door. Come down. Talk, shake our hand.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, it
We
is-
do have a senator on the floor.
I respect you too.
Senators?
Gentlemen, may I?
Don't put boys around each other, man.
Madam President,
But a different plane.
it is my pleasure to rise in support of this legislation,
Understand what this is.
the Interception of Communications Bill 2018. Now, Madam President, we've heard a lot being said about this bill ever since it was introduced. And I will not go into the technicalities of the bill. Our Attorney General has explained it and its implications very well, and there's little that I need to add in that respect. I will say, though, Madam President, that this is a much-needed piece of legislation, despite having been made somewhat controversial. And it raises questions about privacy and questions about the possibility of abuse by those in authority, persons such as the Attorney General, the Minister with responsibility for national security, Commissioner of Police, and other such persons who may be given authorization to intercept communications. Madam President, I understand these concerns on some level. Abuse of authority is a vile practice which has the potential to hurt innocent people, and a practice which must not be tolerated in any society. It is a practice in which this government has vowed not to engage, and in fact seeks to stamp out wherever they find it. As to the issue of privacy, Madam President, this is a very serious concern, as the right to privacy is a fundamental right guaranteed to every citizen under our Constitution. And I would just like to point out that Article 15 of the Constitution provides that every person in the Bahamas is entitled to protection for the privacy of his home. But it says that this is subject to respect for the rights and freedom of others and for the public interest. And Madam President, Article 24 of the Constitution goes on to say that, except with his consent, no person shall be subject to the search of his person or his property or the entry by others on his premises. And here again it goes on to say that nothing contained or done under the authority of any law shall be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of this article to the extent that the law in question makes provision which is reasonably required in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, public health, and it goes on in that vein. So, Madam President, while I am a strong proponent of privacy of the individual, even in public life, I accept that there are some considerations which override the constitutionally mandated right to privacy. And some of those considerations, Madam President, are global threats such as terrorism, and then there are specific domestic problems which threaten us, such as crime, which is escalating in our country. We are increasingly plagued by the scourge of drugs and the violence inherent in drug trafficking. And then, Madam President, we have the problem of gangs and the senseless turf wars and violence spawned by them. And of course, there's the problem of guns, which have become necessary tools in all these kinds of activities. Madam President, according to the police statistics, last year we had 122 murders, 13 attempted murders, and 575 armed robberies. The police also removed 327 firearms from the street, seized more than 2,000 pounds of cocaine, and more than 17,000 pounds of marijuana. This should not be happening in a country as small as ours. And it tells me that crime is spiraling out of control. And Madam President, I won't even go into the social consequences of all these kinds of activities, except to say that they create a culture that breeds and nourishes criminality to the extent that as a country, we appear at times to be held hostage to the criminal elements. So, Madam President, where do we draw the line? How do we stop or at least make a serious dent in these kinds of activities? We are working on many fronts, and this bill would be a useful addition to our arsenal of weapons to fight crime. The criminal elements are very organized. They use the most advanced technologies and techniques, and we must be able to match them if we are going to be successful. Madam President, I do not believe that interception of communications is a new thing. I believe that it was done by countries all over the world in some shape or form from time immemorial. However, I know that responsible and well-managed countries have formalized legislation to govern such practices in order to avoid abuses and to promote the public good and national security. This bill is not the first of its kind for us. Since the early 1970s, we have had the Listening Devices Act, which authorized the use of listening devices where the minister responsible for national security was satisfied that the interests of defense or national security so required. This legislation updates the Listening Devices Act. It takes into consideration advances in technology, new domestic and global threats. It is more specific and broadens the scope of the Listening Devices Act. And Madam President, I am pleased to hear, we've heard a lot of back and forth about the bill that was brought previously by the PLP as against this bill. I am pleased, and I commend the PLP for having seen the wisdom of bringing such a bill, of having seen the need and being willing to address it. And I believe, Madam President, that even when governments change, we know that everything that was done by a previous government was not bad. And where we find that they introduced legislation or done anything that was good or useful to the country, new governments have a duty, have a responsibility to take that which is good and use it, and if they need to, as this government has done, improve on it or in any way tweak it so that it becomes more effective, that is what they do. So I don't see why we even need to go back and forth, except to commend the previous government for having started it, and we recognize that we have a duty to complete it, which we are attempting to do now. Also, Madam President, this legislation in Part 2 takes the concerns of abuse, of possible abuse mentioned earlier into consideration, as it sets out strict guidelines as to how a warrant for interception of communications or a warrant for entry to facilitate the interception of communications may be obtained. It also sets out who may obtain such warrants and the time period for which such warrants will be valid. It makes it an offense, Madam President, to intercept communications except as provided for in the legislation. The bill prohibits the use of information obtained for evidentiary purposes, with certain exceptions, and sets limits on the use of listening devices and communication of private conversations recorded by listening devices. And further, Madam President, the bill sets out measures for ensuring the confidentiality and security of the information obtained under the provisions of this bill, so as to protect the privacy of individuals. We know, Madam President, that we as Bahamians, and perhaps people as a whole, guard our privacy jealously. And we bristle at anything that we perceive as having the possibility of infringing upon our privacy. And I remember, Madam President, some years ago, when it was suggested that fingerprints should be placed on driver's licenses. And there was a big objection to that. And many were saying that this would compromise the privacy of individuals. I couldn't understand it at the time, as I thought it was a good idea, as it would provide the country with a fingerprint database, give the police a weapon to use in its fight against crime. And I thought at the time that the only people who would object were those who had some criminal intent and didn't want the police to have something against which to compare their fingerprints, which they might have obtained from a crime scene, for example.
Uncensored in your archives.
I remember having a break-in at my house, and the police came, dusted all my windows with dirtied it up with black matter. And I remember my neighbor saying, I don't know why you even bother with that. They don't have anything to compare that with. wasting their time. Well, I never heard anything from it.
Very professional.
But I feel that had they had this fingerprint database, it would have helped them. They have had something they could go and compare the fingerprints they lifted from my windowsill to see if who had entered the house. But they didn't have it. And Madam President, I feel the same way about this interception of communication bills. I feel that the only people who ought to be concerned are those who are likely to be involved in some nefarious act, some criminality, or even worse. Of course, I don't want anyone to listen to my conversations or intercept any of my communications, but what are the chances that anyone would be interested in doing so? And if they are, I mean, what are they likely to hear?
Why would you think they wouldn't be interested in your
What,
plan?
why would they? I mean, all they would hear perhaps is some words that they don't think I use, but, you know. Unless I'm a problem. Yeah, I don't expect, I've lived this long without being a problem, and I think I can manage another 20, 30 years, I hope, without being a problem. So, Madam President, I believe that this legislation is much needed and that our law-abiding citizens have nothing to fear from it. I strongly support it, Madam President, and with that, I give my full support to this bill.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jenny Dotson. Dotson Isaacs, or Isaacs Dotson, sorry. Isaacs. Man round the softball park, we call her Dotson.
Madam President, I stand today to give my heartfelt condolences to the families of Tammy Gibson, the Assistant Secretary General of the Bahamas Financial Services Union, Diane Gray Ferguson, mother of Bahamas Financial Services Trustee Tiffany Moss, Tabitha Bethel Hay, a former member of the Bahamas Financial Services Union who marched every Labor Day, and Kathleen Rogers Fernanda, an avid supporter of the Bahamas Financial Services Union and a close friend of its current president of the Bahamas Financial Services Union, Sister Teresa Mortimer, who all lost their lives in the tragic event of June 1st, Labor Day. This event was indeed unfortunate and fit into the theme for Labor Day, which was Workers United, an injury to one is an injury to all. I ask the entire country to continue to keep those who lost their lives, families, those who were injured, those still hospitalized, the Secretary General of the Bahamas Financial Services Union, LaShawn Sawyer, and her son, Travis Sawyer, in their prayers. I wish to express my gratitude to those persons who responded when this unfortunate incident occurred, the Nurses and Doctors Union, fellow trade unionists, the Princess Margaret Hospital administration and staff, the administration and staff of Doctors Hospital, the leaders of the trade union movement, Brothers Bernard Evans and Obie Ferguson, the management and staff of CIBC First Caribbean International Bank, Senator the Honorable Dion Fowlkes, Minister of Labor, and the Minister of Health, Dr. Dwayne Sands. I wish to humbly suggest that we find a fitting tribute to memorialize this event and for all to remember our fallen sisters. May their souls rest in peace. And Madam President, may I ask that we have a moment of silence, please, for those fallen sisters. Thank you, Senators. Madam President, I now turn my attention to the Interception of Communication Bill 2018. And just to say, and we've already heard the concerns of one of the opposition, that this bill is not intended to be used by persons who may have their own personal agendas. I think that that is something that we need to say, or want to act outside of the law. That is not the intention of this bill. This bill gives a high level of transparency, accountability, and a clear process to follow in order to get a warrant for the same. The interception in this bill, Madam President, must be authorized by a judge upon an ex parte application by the Attorney General at the request of an authorized officer, such as the Commissioner of Police or a person authorized by the Director of the Bureau of Investigation. Offenses that you can get an interception order for is terrorist acts, terrorism, financing, genocide, drug and firearm trafficking, money laundering, acquisition of or creation of weapons of mass destruction, espionage, or subversion. It also allows for the use of certain devices for listening to private conversations. In essence, this bill will allow the government to be guided by the rule of law and will not infringe on the rights of Bahamians. This bill allows for warrants to be given for specific offenses or indictable offenses, as we heard the Attorney General say. Madam President, the protection of privacy and freedom of information are fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution of the Bahamas and recognized, of course, in our common law. Madam President, this bill is needed particularly due to the type of crime we see today on the international arena, and particularly trickling down to the regional and national level. The crimes we see today, not only at home, should be a cause of concern and alarm for all. This bill will be a deterrent to ensure that we as a country can deal with these types of crimes that are more technologically savvy and is more than just the Listening Devices Act. This bill, Madam President, will allow us as a country to intercept the planning and execution of serious crimes and allow for privacy protection for Bahamian citizens. Globally, cybercrimes cost approximately $600 billion annually. And I'm sure that many of us have had our credit cards hacked or some system hacked, which is, of course, a concern. Additionally, the Bahamas is not the only country who is pushing for this type of bill. We have other countries in the region and internationally who are also pushing for this type of bill, such as Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, the United Kingdom, Australia, and St. Lucia. This bill will be used to counter national security threats and combat serious crimes, Madam President. Therefore, Madam President, I stand today to support this Interception of Communication Bill 2018.
Thank you, Senator. As many, Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Renard Henfield.
Madam President, honorable senators, my fellow Bahamians, good afternoon. I commence my contributions recognizing today that everything I am, everything that I've done has been by the mercy, blessings, and plans of God. And I make my contributions today without fear of disappointment or to gain favor with anyone. As Dr. King stated once, there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular. But he must take it because conscience tells him it is right. Madam President, whether it was in the UK, Trinidad, Jamaica, Canada, St. Kitts or St. Lucia. Any attempt by their governments to invade the privacy of its citizens in the interest of national security was met with staunch pushback from sectors of those countries. In fact, right here in the Bahamas, Madam President, just last year when the PLP government sought to introduce its version of the Interception of Communications Bill, We March, Rights Bahamas, and the FNM's leadership made a big ado about the bill. My concerns then, Madam President, centered around the infringement on the right to privacy pursuant to Article 15, the issue of entry to someone's premises without their consent pursuant to Article 24, and the potential blockage of movements like We March to organize and express the electorate's dissent with the government's policies and practices. Tony Blair once said, Madam President, anytime, anywhere, ordinary people are given the chance to choose, the choice is the same. Freedom, not tyranny. Democracy, not dictatorship. The rule of law, and not the rule of the secret police. In the democratic Bahamas that I intend to raise my two daughters, I hope that they would be able to grow up feeling safe and free to express their views publicly, though respectfully, without any legislation, with arcane laws to subdue them. What has been quoted repeatedly in that other place, and here in this chamber today by Senator Darville, was the February 20th, 2017 comments of now Prime Minister Hubert Minnis, but quoted in part. And I quote, "On Wednesday in Parliament, the government intends to push through their Interception of Communications Bill 2017. This piece of legislation, which has been rushed and rammed down the throats of the Bahamian people, should not be allowed to stand. It is a breach of the privacy of the public at large, and it is our fear that this bill has more to do with blocking any opposition to this current government than being a useful crime-fighting tool. It is unacceptable for an administration that took 5 years to bring forward a Freedom of Information Act to attempt to rush a bill of this magnitude without any form of consultation with the Bahamian people." In summary, the Prime Minister, then in opposition, had similar concerns and suggested that the bill should be put out for consultation. Madam President, upon coming into office, this administration did just that. I don't see any hypocrisy there, Madam President. I don't see the flip-flopping there, Madam President. The former leader of the opposition, now Prime Minister, had said that it should be put out for consultation. 8 months of consultation to be exact. 8 months longer than the PLP government put out this bill for consultation. And Madam President, I note that several amendments were made to the bill, and I commend the Attorney General and this administration for seizing the opportunity to co-create legislation with civil society and the public at large. And there's no secret, Madam President, that civil society has an agenda. It's not a secret. And that agenda includes fearlessly agitating for transparency, access to information, for the government to keep our people safe, for minimal intrusion of people's right to privacy, and the protection of people's right to express their dissent on government policy decisions and practices. With that said, Madam President, I don't see much difference between civil society's agenda and this present government's manifesto. As I reflect, Madam President, on February 2017, I recall activist and attorney Fred Smith saying that the challenge for us was that we were being made to consider this bill with a gun to our heads. He advised the Attorney General then not to bring this back in any form before the general election, and stated it's something that should be dealt with by the new Parliament. And this new Parliament is now dealing with this bill after 8 months of consultation. Madam President, let me state at this point that while I support legislation to keep our people safe, and I applaud the previous government's and this government's political will to regulate the interception of communication, knowing fully well that communications are already being intercepted without any regulations. While I support the regulatory intent, I cannot throw my full support behind the bill in its current form for a couple of reasons, which I shall come to in a moment, Madam President. There is no doubt that this administration is determined to combat serious crime. Madam President, just over a year ago, as an activist and the leader of We March, I vehemently opposed this bill. And the only thing that has changed is the platform to which I protest the bill. Prior to the elections, that platform was Bay Street proper with megaphones, placards, and thousands of people in tow. Today, that platform is within the halls of Parliament. With a government that listens to its people, listens to civil society, works with civil society, and protects civil society. I will direct your attention now to Section 2 of the bill and the schedule of offenses. The offense of sedition, Madam President, was used in the British Empire to suppress and punish political dissent. And there is no intellectual or functional basis for maintaining the law of sedition on Bahamian statute books today, where and when freedom of thought and expression are crucial. And civil unrest has resulted in majority rule, independence, elevated so many individuals to public office, and advanced our politics and national development to where it is today. Why do we cling to such arcane and repressive laws? When this bill was tabled in 2017 by this administration, sedition was listed. But We March organizations met with the Attorney General in September of last year, and our civil society organizations expressed our concern for several issues in this bill, sedition being one of them. And I am happy to note that in the bill before this Parliament today, sedition has been removed. People shouldn't be afraid of their government, Madam President. Governments should be afraid of their people, so expressed by Alan Moore. Would We March organized and said on Black Friday 2016 and Majority Rule 2017, and also threatened to organize while the Privy Council was in town last year during the time that the PLP government was tabling this bill, could very well have been considered acts of sedition or subversion. Yesterday, Keep Your Corned Beef, We Marching could very well have been deemed as the same, as sedition. Barricades were pushed down, a member of Parliament doused with water. The PLP leadership, though annoyed with the whole We March movement, Madam President, just a year ago, was out there We Marching yesterday. I never understood why they resisted We March a year ago, when they were the party that championed and taught us civil disobedience. Yet they were poised to intercept communications, Madam President, on the basis of any offense, which included sedition. Section 2 speaks to the interests of national security. Section 5 of their bill spoke to public order and the protection or prevention and detection of an offense. As a matter of conscience, having just inspired thousands of Bahamians to take to the streets and not hide behind social media, but to take to the streets and express their dissent, as a matter of conscience, I opposed the bill then. So imagine my predicament today. Truth is, I am in no predicament, Madam President. I stand here as a consultative senator and an activist amidst an administration that listens to its people, that listens to civil society. And we see now that sedition has been removed. We see now, Madam President, that this version of the bill removes any offense and speaks to only serious offenses. Madam President, permit me to digress for a moment. I grew up 2 doors west of Windsor Park. And I remember as a young teenage boy, my Uncle Willie Moore sat down one day across from the park and told me that my mother was born in August of 1958. And at the time of my mother's birth in August of 1958, Surrandal folks had organized and led a movement right there next to our homestead on Windsor Park. And that Surrandal had delivered a speech that eventually caused his arrest. for sedition. And I will quote, "I am not afraid to go the limit if your rights are challenged. The time is coming when we will have to go the limit simply because men who we put into positions in the House of Assembly have forgotten who put them there and are being used by your enemies for our own destruction. It is simple democracy that when representatives fail to do the people's wish, that we, the people, have to whip them back into line." And this is how I was feeling when I organized the whole We March movement of Black Friday and Majority Rule 2017. That PLP government needed to be whipped back in line. And thousands of Bahamians took to the streets to express their dissent. That short excerpt of Sir Randall's speech resulted in his arrest and charge for sedition. And for those listening and are not aware of what sedition could include, please note that sedition includes activities that incite unlawful civil unrest against the government. And after consulting with civil society at the Attorney General's office last year after this bill was tabled, again, Madam President, this government listened and removed sedition. As one of many strong voices for civil society, as an activist and as a consultative senator, I urge this administration to do so, and so it has been done. And I share, Madam President, in 2010, via Section 73 of the Coroners and Justice Act, the United Kingdom abolished the offense of sedition, among others. Justice Minister Claire Ward, in her contribution, stated that sedition is an arcane offense but from a bygone era where freedom of expression wasn't seen as the right it is today. Freedom of speech is now seen as the touchstone of democracy, and the ability of individuals to criticize the state is crucial to maintaining freedom. The existence of these obsolete offenses in this country had been used by other countries as justification for the retention of similar laws which have been actively used to suppress political dissent and restrict press freedom. Abolishing these offenses will allow the UK to take a lead in challenging similar laws in other countries where they are used to suppress free speech. The Bahamian Parliament and this government has decided to offer no safe harbor to sedition, and I commend them. But I now turn, Madam President, to that which still causes concern for those in civil society. The entry warrants, Madam President, is the second of two regimes under this bill. The first regime is that of the interception of communications. The second regime is the entry warrants. In the last 16 months of research, Madam President, I have not seen this legislated in any other jurisdiction with an Interception of Communications Act. I checked the UK, Trinidad, Jamaica, etc., and it's not there. So I've not been able to benchmark the far-reaching powers for the invasion of privacy that this particular regime provides. What oversight is there that ensures persons entering into someone's home will not leave anything in those premises? How does the Supreme Court judge ensure that nothing untoward occurs in the premises of these suspects? They're not accused with anything, they're suspects. Madam President, I fear that the entry warrants may be used disproportionately on the poorer members of our society as opposed to the wealthy and gated communities, as they have sophisticated camera systems, alarm systems, housekeepers that are always home, hence making it nearly or virtually impossible to effect the secretive entry warrant to plant or install a listening device. It reminds me of our failed attempt to wage war on drug smuggling here in the Bahamas, which has in the last few decades only been a successful war on young Bahamian men using small quantities of drugs, resulting in an overcrowded prison with young men whose futures have been destroyed because of simple possession, employment and education opportunities dashed, and thus directed to further life of crime, but now serious crime. When we wage war on crime in the Bahamas with this Interception of Communications bill, I wish to ensure that the war is not solely on a significantly focused on the least among us. Madam President, on this regime of entry warrants, I leave you with this: a reporting mechanism to Parliament, along with a table report indicating how many entry warrants were granted in the year, how many arrests and convictions were subsequently made, along with the communities in which those entry warrants were executed is needed. Additionally, Madam President, an oversight of the entry warrant process ought to have been included in this bill. Unfortunately, the bill in its present form does not allay these fears or concerns. While the bill is needed to stamp out serious crime and give law enforcement an upper hand, the Roman poet Juvenal asks, who will guard the guards? Finally and secondly, the veto power, Madam President, has been cause for concern for many in civil society. I like the former Attorney General, who I sit next to in church every Sunday, and I like this Attorney General, but I don't know who will come 10, 15, 20 years from now when this law is entrenched. Why must the Commissioner of Police, it's a concern for the civil society, why must the Commissioner of Police, with trained attorneys on the force, go through the Attorney General to make an application for interception? What happens when Jane Doe goes to the police and states that a sitting government official is involved in corruption? A cabinet colleague of the Attorney General is suspected of being engaged in serious crime, and the AG has a veto power. What is not being said by anyone, but that is mumbled by many within their comfort zones, is that the Bahamian people trust the judiciary more than they trust politicians. They don't see the need for politicians to get involved in the policing and judicial process provided there is oversight. Because of my profession, I understand why the AG office makes the application. You see, Madam President, in the Magistrates Court, the Commissioner of Police's prosecutors bring criminal proceedings, oversee criminal proceedings. But in the Supreme Court, where the interception of communications, applications, and orders will be sought, those applications and hearings are carried out by an attorney in the Attorney General's office. But while the Supreme Court and not the executive makes the determination of granting the interception, the AG, a member of the executive or cabinet, determines which applications will make it to the Supreme Court, a cause for concern for civil society. Which Commissioner of Police in 10 to 15 years, Madam President, will go to the AG to intercept the communications of a member of the executive? Again, cause for concern for those of us in civil society. Madam President, as I resume my seat, while I commend the government for removing sedition from the schedule and making so many other amendments to this bill, I would look at Section 5(1) of the bill tabled by the PLP that listed so many things, including the interceptions could be done pursuant to the interests of national security, public order, public morality, public safety, public health. And I see this administration remove so many of these things, so I commend them. But I caution the administration on the lack of oversight on the entry warrants and the lack of a reporting mechanism. I also express civil society's concern for the purported veto power of the AG. And I repeat the words of the Roman poet Juvenal, who will guard the guards? Madam President.
Thank you very much, Honorable Senator. As many, Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam President. I was waiting actually to find out whether Senator Hanfield was going to vote yes or no on this bill. I couldn't determine it.
Enigmatic.
Because there was a publicly announced position. Well, it wasn't on the record in this position, so you say it hasn't changed. And the reason is because across the floor, when we were on our seats, the senator asked the question of why, something like, why was I spending so much time on him? I think he said it in a jocular fashion. No, sorry. Please, don't put these things in personal terms, man. I'm not in here for no personal thing, right? No, and it isn't, I don't even know it is politics. As I was saying to the President of the Senate, it's a structural issue I'm seeking to discuss. These institutions are important to me. These institutions are not a joke, right? So I'm trying to make a serious point. And I made the point I was making was not personal to you. It was not personal to you. The point is, if you are, as was announced, the whip of the government, The government is supposed to speak with one voice. Well, I mean, all of that stuff came out later in here. There is an official voice, so on and so forth. But as far as we were concerned, the Senate had a whip, and the whip is Senator Handfield. Up until today, there was no qualification on that. The point I was making is, the whip is at one with the cabinet. And when the cabinet presents something, the cabinet speaks with one voice. I am saying that up to this point, that point was not until this morning. And so the only issue, no, sorry. Exactly. And I'm saying if you have institutions, they perform in a particular way. And the government speaks with one voice.
I think,
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable
thank you.
Carl Bethel
Thank you.
for this time.
Thank you, ma'am. For clarity and for the true record, I think I would suggest that my friend opposite make it clear that what he is saying is that until this point in terms of the public discourse, that wasn't made clear. But he and I have had our exchange on this issue, so it was made clear, but not publicly. That's the only point I want to make clear. Thank you.
We are public officials, man. We're not private officials. No, and I'm not conceding that because I don't even remember it. But what I'm saying is, the only thing I'm answering is this. Do not make this a personal thing. It isn't. It's a structural thing. And if you say someone is the whip is as one with the cabinet. That is the point I'm making. And you can try and, minimize that and say whatever and so on and so forth. That's the point. That's the point. That's the point. That's the point. And treat the institution properly. Now, as it relates to how these bills came here, I heard all the back and forth and twisting and turning and so on and so forth that was going on. The position was adequately, as I can tell, settled by Senator Johnny Ann Dorset, which is the Privy Council makes a decision on a ruling, in 2011. That ruling was on the constitutionality of Section 5 of the Listening Devices Act. It was challenged by someone named Maycock, who must have been the subject of the Listening Devices Act, and his lawyers were attempting to exclude certain evidence because they said that it had been captured unconstitutionally. The Privy Council reviewed all of the law, and as best I could understand the judgment in 2011, they said that even though there were issues relating to the modern and accepted standard and practice, because of something called the Equal Law Amendments. It's called the Equal Law Amendment Act, or Equal Law Amendment Rule in the Constitution. Right, which says that, essentially, in a lot of complicated language. Some people said the drafting was bad, but complicated language. Anything which was constitutional before 1973 could not be challenged on the grounds of constitutionality after 1973. Right. Now, they sought to make a distinction between executive action and law, but that also had a problem because Privy Council says, so bottom line is, notwithstanding all of it, they said, at the end of the day, even though it does not match up to the present constitutional standards, we need to, we uphold the law because it does not violate the present constitution, but impliedly said perhaps the legislature ought to look at this again. That's how the bill got its genesis. Now, The difficulty you always have is, when do you do these things? Law reform produces a lot of things. Problem is that it came at the end of the term and became fodder for an election. So at that point, no rationality could prevail. And everybody had gotten their buzzwords. Our friend opposite had decided it was a spy bill and so on and so forth, and their friends in the media just went crazy with all of this nonsense. When you look at the text of both bills, you'll find that the changes are minimal. But essentially, the regime is the same. Regime is the same. And so the modern practice and standard, Madam President, is to allow a judge to review the applications. So it's just not a political figure that's doing it. That's the whole idea. And that regime is what obtains in the present bill. And nothing that has, in terms of the amendments, okay, we hear about an offense and so on and so forth. I mean, we can argue that back and forth all day, but the question is, it goes before a judge, and the judge makes a determination as to whether or not this should take place. And this brings it into conformity with the modern standards, but there's a subtext which I find very interesting that in our country about this whole question of listening devices. In a society where privacy has morphed so far from what I remember and understand from growing up to today, where I don't know if, I'm going to call them kids, but the people who are much younger than me actually know or appreciate or care what privacy is. Because it appears that in everything we do these days, privacy has gone completely out the window. But as the senator said, she doesn't want anybody listening to her conversations. She did go on to say she can't imagine why they would want to do that, but that isn't the point. The point is, it's your conversation, it's your image, it's your home, it's your life, and you ought to have the right to protect the privacy of your domain. Your thoughts, your opinions, your speech, all of those things ought to be private. And there are compelling reasons for doing so, even if it's just because you want them to be private. And that's something which I think has sort of gone out of the window. People casually say, well, I know all my conversations are being recorded. The other day I called a businessman and he didn't answer the phone. A few minutes later, he calls me back on WhatsApp. So I said, with a different number. So I said, well, what's this? Huh? He says, well, you know, I have to make sure because everybody's listening, you know, people are listening to my telephone conversations. So there's a feeling around the country that every conversation that you have on a phone is being monitored and listened to by someone. And I come to that. As foreign minister, we were sucker punched with this report that our phone calls were all being listened to. And they said that the report says that using the lawful authority to monitor the activities of drug people, they were using this as a backdoor to monitor all conversations in the Bahamas. So as foreign minister, I'm tasked to address that issue. And we could, well, you know, on the one hand, on the next hand, on the other hand, so on and so. Finally, we got from the Assistant Secretary of State a paragraph which essentially said, going forward, we will use the lawful authority for the purposes for which they were granted. And, well, hopefully, that's what it is. But in the modern era, that is what we face. And I see in the discussions which we had here in this place when I was talking about the legislation to do with Financial Transactions Reporting Act and this assault, for example, on cash. and everybody wants to make it a cashless society. And this is supposed to be the panacea for all the problems. And of course, you know that once you start talking about electronic and cashless and all the rest of that, everybody has a perfect record of what you're doing at every stage along the way. So again, the exchange that you're making for this so-called advance into electronic or cashless society is a loss of privacy. So we have to continue to think about it. So I want that to be clear from our side. Our colleagues have advised us in the other place that all of the objections that were raised were accommodated by the government. And so we see no reason fundamentally to object to it, and will vote to support it as precisely the update in the standards and a modern tool to fight crime. So that's the basis of it. So that in sum is where we are, and I'm still going to see how this vote goes, whether it's yes or no, because the proof the proof is always in the pudding. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. As many.
Thank you. Madam President. Yeah.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you very much. With the exception of the last comment, I think that, and apart from a few scruffles at the first, we've had a very, very interesting, intellectual, stimulating, and civil debate. Although I must remonstrate with my good friend opposite, man, don't threaten my independent senator, please, impliedly. Let me just very quickly say that yes, you know, that, yeah, in my view, political will is an important part of anything that governments do. And responsiveness also is an important part. I'm glad I was reminded of the removal of sedition and criminal libel as predicate offenses. They were specifically named in the formal bill tabled by the other side, and they were consciously removed. I consciously said, take those out. Why? Because in the history of the Bahamas, both the offenses of sedition were mightily abused and criminal libel were mightily abused. So, for example, there was a joke across the floor about the magistrate Maxwell Thompson, who charged a client, I think, for not a client, a defendant, Sir Randall, right? Wanted to charge him with sedition because Sir Randall didn't like the rule and went on sudden recreation ground and said that the magistrate had the hand of Esau but the voice of Jacob. And that was a seditionable offense to say that. Similarly, Sir Randall was actually charged, as Senator Henfield pointed out, with sedition for saying what is really elementary in modern democracy. If your MPs don't behave themselves, you whip them in line. And the way you do that is you go out on the road and you protest and whatever, or you, as occurred with the last government and ourselves in 2012, when you go to the poll, people, you know, they find a way to get in that poll. You stand in the door, greeting every voter, and they find a way to get past you and not even see you there. I always say, payment voters, when they're ready to mess you up, they know how to walk sideways and just don't see you. Senator Darville, you'd have been through that recently, and yeah, they don't look you in the face. You see, so long as they don't look you in the face, and even if they shake your hand, don't look you in the eye, they haven't really seen you. Mama always used to say, watch who you let pray over you. Yeah. I think that means they come to scorch something next to you, next to someone else's name and not yours. But no, so we consciously determined to remove sedition. Criminal libel, Lionel Dawson was charged for criminal libel for publishing on the front page of the Torch a photograph and under the the heading, the chief is a thief, and he was charged with criminal libel. Of course, the jury of his peers say, don't waste our time. But the point is that these were clearly what one would term political offenses, and if they're political offenses, it shouldn't be matters of interception of communication, since politics is always overt. And so prove your case in court. The one point I wanted to point about is judicial oversight, Senator Henfield, does not and cannot mean judicial fortune telling or prognostication or future telling. But what is important is this: every warrant is signed by a judge. And if there is some abuse that someone picks up, they have the judge, like for example in the Darren Cash matter, had he been under this situation, he would have the warrant signed by that judge. His counsel could have addressed the abuse to that judge, if you will, if there were any abuse. Of course, this was a search warrant, and they were entitled to have the search. The police were entitled, once they got the warrant, to get the search. But the problem is it was as a result of a criminal complaint by a civil party. And I won't go any further than that. And it had nothing to do with anything serious. It was a commercial matter. It was a commercial matter. Yeah, that is true. But no, I think they tend to go to their favorite magistrates. There's several, I don't know. Hey, I don't know, justice of the peace, whatever. That's the only point. The point is that if some abuse occurs, the citizen has the right. They will know which judge signed, because they'd have to have a copy of the warrant. And even if they didn't have a copy, if they came home and suddenly saw a bunch of wires dangling from all over the place, and realized that someone had used an entry warrant to bug their house, they'd be able to go to the court and obtain an order to produce. And that order to produce would indicate the judge, and then the whole basis of it could be looked into. So there are remedies that this law will provoke. I want to thank you for instructing Senator Darwin in this chamber as to the exact, full, nuanced position of the FNM in early 2017. It was not, and the statement clearly makes it clear, an opposition to the powers. It was a lack of consultation and the breadth of what was supposed to be done and the timing. Lack of consultation, all that you intend to do, and the timing on the eve of an election. Senator Mitchell, on the question of the whip, I reaffirm everything that I've stated in here and not in here, that there is no such thing as a whip in the Senate. It was an honorific applied to him because he assisted the leader in doing some things that were a bit of a drag on the leader, trying to do a lot of other things to corral speakers, to prepare. I prepared the matrix, but to fill it in every time was a lot, the speaking order. And just basically motivating senators and reminding them of what I do probably more bluntly every so often, that if you are appointed to this place or in that place, there is no higher duty than to be present whenever that chamber is in session. I'm surprised. Every time I look at my WhatsApp, and debates are going on even in some other place, at the amount of people who, I'm at this meeting and I'm at that meeting and I'm doing this. No, sir. And we won't tolerate it in the Senate. If you are appointed and you take this appointment, whenever this chamber meets, you are supposed to be here. The only thing is grave ill health. Don't say you got a flu and staying home. Be here. Because you took on yourself the duty to serve. And when your chamber meets, you should be here. So, I only want to make one last comment to what Senator Mitchell said, to say this. He says the changes are minimal. I answer, but significant. Let's say the poem, I took the road less traveled. I took the one less traveled. But that has made all the difference. We made changes not contemplated in the PLP's bill. And that, my friend, that has made all the difference. The last point I want to say is on this question of the intrusiveness, if you will, of interception, communications, particularly in other countries. I well remember. You remember the trial of Blagojevich? I think he was a governor or something. I think of, and he wanted to get the Senate seat or something. He wanted some benefit, but everything he said was tendered in trial, in evidence. Well, how do they get historic conversations with this man? It's this whole schema of metadata and capturing everything. And when someone makes an allegation that, hey, you know, the governor trying to plea bargain and offer favors to who he's going to award this seat to for money, and the fellas go back and they go to their metadata and they pull up everything they got on Blagojevich. They ain't looking at it, they ain't listening to it, but it's all being collected. This is the way the United States goes. So they were able, undoubtedly, to pull up every single conversation this man missing had on any kind of phone. And reams of it. So that's a metadata situation they have in America. We don't have that problem. Recently in the UK, their metadata structure, no, we don't keep metadata, was attacked and brought into line with, okay, we'll talk afterwards, into line with European best practices. In order to have metadata, you need storerooms full of servers. So I can confidently say we don't keep metadata here. I said we don't keep metadata here. I can't swear for anyone else who got satellites over the country or any other country. So on those notes, Madam President, I now beg that the question now be put. Thank you.
The question is that the following bill be read a second time and committed, a bill for an act to provide for the interception of communications and the provision of information for interception in the Bahamas and for related matters. As many are in favor, a bill being read a second time would say aye. Those opposed, nay. I think I better put that question again. As many are in favor of the bill being read a second time would say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed. Further second readings and committal of bill?
There are none, Madam President. Madam President, may I now rise and make the following motion that the Senate do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole and that Madam Vice President take the chair.
It has been moved and seconded that
If I may obtain a second.
Sorry.
You hurry.
Yeah, I guess. It's been moved and seconded that the Senate resolve itself into the committee of the whole with the Vice President and Chair. As many are in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. The Senate will now resolve itself into the committee of the whole with the Vice President in the chair.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the long title of the act be agreed. If I may obtain a seconder. Hey, hold on. Yeah. Lady. Okay.
It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed.
As many.
As many?
As
As many as are in favor,
Say aye.
say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The long title has been agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the short title and commencement of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor of the bill, of the short title being agreed, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The short title has been agreed.
Madam President, Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that sections 2 through 45 of the bill be agreed.
Madam Vice, I second.
It has been moved and seconded that sections 2 through 45 be agreed. Those, as many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
The ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Sections 2 through 45 has been agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the schedule to the bill be agreed.
Second.
The section to the bill, schedule to the bill be agreed.
As many? As many?
As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
The ayes have it.
The ayes have it. The schedule has been agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
The ayes have it.
One nay. The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move now that Madam President to resume her chair. If I may, then a second.
It has been agreed and seconded that the president retain a chair. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The president shall resume her chair. Who's going to get her?
Listen, it pissed me off, right? I sent him the amendment and so Jeff, like, he copies the whole act amendment. So I sent him a copy with the annotated amendment. I mean, annotated with the amendment since it, right? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, I said, here's the one thing. I said, I would remind ministers and the ministers of all updating copies of the act. Yeah? Yeah. Sure.
Madam President, the bill has been agreed with the sections 2 through 45 and the schedule.
Is it all right? Just to stall for a second. All right. Yes, Madam President.
Honorable Senators, the Vice President
On the ice.
and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole has reported that the committee has gone through the bills and have made no amendments.
Yeah.
Third reading and passing of bills.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the third reading and passage of a bill for an act to provide for the interception of communications and the provision of information for interception in the Bahamas and for related matters. If I may obtain a seconder.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. A bill for an act to provide for the interception of communications and the provision of information for interception in the Bahamas and for related matters. As many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed. Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Interception of Communications Act 2018. Further third readings?
Yeah.
Further third readings?
There are no further third readings, Madam President.
I do now order the clerk to take the bill passed today to the Speaker and acquaint him that the Senate has consented to the same without amendments. Consideration of House amendments,
None.
resolutions,
None.
discharge of select committees,
None.
notices for future meetings.
Madam President, I beg leave to renew all matters in the name of the government on the notice paper.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Darville.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I wish to renew all matters as it relates to the opposition. Thank you, Madam.
Orders for clerk.
Call it. Madam President,
I'm sorry.
I beg leave to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, which we anticipate will be Wednesday, the 20th of June, 2018, all things going according to the announced schedule of the governing party in the other place, we will be meeting here at 10 a.m. in order to begin our debate on the 2018-2019 budget, communication, and associated bills. Thank you.
Orders for clerk. Just before I call for the adjournment, I just want to wish all fathers a very happy Father's Day throughout the country. I particularly,
Your time is up.
I particularly would like to certainly extend a happy Father's Day to my better half, Godfrey, and to my father, Vincent, and to all fathers in the country.
Well, let me join you, Madam President, in expressing on behalf of the government of the Bahamas and, of course, the senators representing the government side in this place, our best wishes to all Bahamian fathers and potential fathers for a very happy, enjoyable Father's Day. May this day not be a day for fathers to wallow in the praises and adulation of their spouses and children, but for them, particularly on a Sunday, to give prayerful consideration to what it truly means to be a father. What it truly means, not simply to be a male figure who happens to be heading a household, whether with or without a lawful spouse, and who happens to have fathered children biologically. That fatherhood means so much more, should mean so much more, does mean so much more. And to think of these values and think of what it truly means. Think of what your father meant to you, or the absence of your father meant to you. And you, in your own shoes, think of your children and their mothers or mother, your spouse, hopefully. And really let us all strive to achieve in every day, though we all often fail, to achieve the standards of the virtues of fatherhood. I think if more Bahamian men were to think daily of these things, our society would be infinitely improved. On that note, that's my wish for Father's Day. May I just take this moment to also, on another note, mark the passing of the late Mr. Ulrich William Fox, the father of our own Rick Fox. Mr. Fox, I know, he used to live on top of the hill on Johnson Road, and I used to live down the bottom around the curve in the back of the bush. But I always, saw, waved to, spoke to in passing on my way to school, on my way back from school, passing there with either the Fox boys or Mr. and Mrs. Fox just to say hello. And we all knew each other. He was cast in the mold of those black Bahamians who readily embraced the potential and the fruits of majority rule by devising, conceiving of businesses, going out and forming his own business. And at that time, throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he had Holiday Ice. This is his business. And, you can only marvel at what they achieved in less than a generation. Less than a generation. Starting off as second, perhaps third-class citizens in their own country. But grabbing a hold of the potential conferred by majority rule, they boldly went forward to establish businesses throughout the length and breadth, people like Mr. Fox. And so I think we pause today to commemorate him, to commiserate with his family on his loss, and to commend to the Bahamian people the example of people like Mr. Ulrich Fox, who didn't fail to step forward to take this country to a higher level, creating jobs and employment and providing services to hundreds of thousands of people over the decades. We thank him. We express our deepest sympathies to his family on his loss. And on that note, may God continue to bless him and his family going forward. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Clay Sweeting.
Madam President, on behalf of the opposition, I would like to join in the government in extending our sincere condolences on an entrepreneur in this country when there were not too many Bahamians that owned businesses that contributed a lot. The father of Rick Fox, Mr. Ulrich Williams Fox, who sent his son to become more than just an ordinary Bahamian. That in turn, being a young father, gives me something that's quite fitting on the eve of Father's Day, something that could express how I would like to contribute to my son, being a young father. My son's 2 years old. So you just want the best for your children. You want your best for your country. So I would also like to extend a happy Father's Day to the fathers of this country, especially my grandfather, who this will be his first Father's Day without his wife, and also to my father, who have instilled in me a legacy of fortitude, and really, I don't think I'd be here today without them. So to them, I wish happy Father's Day, and to all the fathers of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. Adjournment. Adjournment.
Thank you. I see that one of our senators heard what I said. You know, I got the court calendar just a second ago. But I told her that's a budget debate. Everybody talks along there, so she'll be all right. Madam President, I beg leave to move now that the Senate, on its rising, do adjourn to Wednesday, the 20th day of June, AD 2018, at 10 a.m. in the morning. If I may obtain a second.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate be adjourned to, the Senate to be adjourned to Wednesday, June 20th. As many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the Senate.
Madam President, I now move that the Senate do now adjourn.
Adjourned. The business of the Senate is now adjourned to Wednesday, June 20th at 10 a.m.